This one is called Streetcars and Railroads. Just something that I thought would be very interesting just to show representative photos of the interaction between the streetcar system and the railroads. And so I'm going to be jumping around the Twin Cities area here. It's mostly Twin City lines, but the Minneapolis, Anoka, and Cuyuna Range appears in here a couple of photos. But again, it's mostly representative photos to talk about different subjects. We're going to start in downtown Minneapolis and then kind of jump around to various areas as we go. So the first photo, I thought this aerial view of the Great Northern Depot in Minneapolis would actually be a pretty good one to sort of illustrate just in a lot of ways how much territory the railroads take or used to take up in downtown Minneapolis. You can certainly see the depot here. And again, this doesn't show this probably shows less than half of the total trackage in downtown Minneapolis, but this shows the Great Northern Depot here. You can see the main lines, excuse me, down to the side here that go over Nicollet Island. You can see the part of the bridge here that goes off on Nicollet Island, then over to Boom Island, which is where I believe at the time this photo was taken, the Chicago Great Western had an engine facility on Boom Island. But in this, you can also see the streetcar tracks going down Hennepin. You can see them coming up. I believe this is Marquette over here. You can see them coming up Marquette. And that's certainly what the Nicollet Avenue cars would have gone on through downtown Minneapolis. Then, of course, you can see some of the other bridges here. Now, other big railroad things like the Stone Arch Bridge are certainly not on here, nor is the Milwaukee Road Depot. But this shows a pretty expansive view of some of the railroad trackage, as well as how the streetcars interacted. And you can see one of the streetcars here on Hennepin as well. Just a few other photos of the Great Northern Depot. Of course, this was the earlier structure that, after many decades, I'm not entirely sure of the exact year, but after many decades, gave way to the structure that we see most of the time in the streetcar photographs of the more recent Great Northern Depot back when it was still in existence. This one here is a 1920s view, and you can see with the paint scheme on the streetcar that this is the sort of this is the paint scheme that it had up into the 1920s. And it's still a gate car in the gate car configuration rather than having any sort of front exit. And then, of course, more of a modern photo when it comes to what we certainly have in the museum's collection here. This would be a 1950s photo, as evidenced by the ads on the outside of the streetcars as well. And then to provide any sort of reference point, if someone were to look at this without having it be in the full context of this presentation, we would have the Grain Belt brewery sign over there, or the Grain Belt beer sign. Then over here is the Chicago Great Western freight station. Moving to the Minneapolis Depot, we have, the Milwaukee Road Depot at Minneapolis. This is one of the older postcards when it still had that cupola at the top of it there. This is the depot I tend to know more about when it comes to railroading. Certainly the Milwaukee Road was here, but as I'm a Rock Island fan, the Rock Island had their passenger trains go through here, such as the Twin Star Rocket when it instituted that after World War II, or toward the end of World War II. And then the Sioux Line also operated their trains out of this depot.
Do we know why they removed the cupola from there?
I'm trying to remember what Aaron may have said in the past about why that cupola was removed. I believe it may have been some sort of damage from potentially a fire or lightning strike, but I'm not necessarily sure. I will have to ask Aaron that to get some information there. If I were to, walk over to my bookshelf and open my book on the Milwaukee Road, I could find you an answer as well. So I might do that after this presentation. This photo here is from a film, and this clip actually does appear in one of the films that was more recently put up of historic footage on our YouTube page. Now, again, being a Rock Island fan, I certainly like the Twin Star Rocket sitting there in the back with those F units and the very classic Art Deco Rock Island scheme. And this would probably be, knowing the history of that train, this is between 1945 and 1950 is when this still from a video would have been taken, because, again, the train wasn't instituted until the very end of World War II, and there's no exterior ads on the streetcar, and so that tells us it's a it's up until 1950 is when this photo was taken. But you can see the train shed and the cupola no longer on top of the depot there. And so this is similar to the structure, the appearance of the structure today, except it does not have these, what do you say, rain guards. It doesn't have the coverings over the platforms anymore. Then, of course, I just wanted to show the third depot that is in Minneapolis, and this is the one that was used by the Minneapolis, Anoka, and Cuyuna Range. It was certainly built by the Electric Short Line Railway, otherwise known as the Loose Line, and then the Dan Patch line also stopped here as well. Now, I know that we talk about the Loose Line and the Dan Patch in terms of the purview of our museum because they originally did start as interurban lines, but I would certainly argue that because they never really electrified, they had more of a railroad character when compared to the other interurbans and the streetcar systems in Minnesota. But I know it covers this sort of transition zone between what is actually a railroad versus what is an interurban / streetcar system. And then, of course, we have the Powerhouse here, which interacted with the railroads in the way of having coal originally come in when that was needed, and then, of course, any sort of building materials as well. You can certainly see on the trestle here a boxcar that would be able to go into the building itself for any unloading of cargo that was inside. And then as a reference point, we see the Stone Arch Bridge off to the side there. Of course, one of the, I guess you could say, operational headaches of some of the lines, as we know, in Minneapolis was the Milwaukee Road trackage that went diagonally across the southern portions of the city there near Hiawatha. The streetcar we're looking at is a Selby Lake car. I would say from the angle of the sun, we're most likely looking at a train heading southbound, and so the camera is facing west-northwest in this. So this is probably a Selby Lake streetcar going back toward downtown St. Paul. But this is on Lake Street. This is near Hiawatha Avenue at the Milwaukee Road trackage there. And we, of course, know that the Milwaukee Road had their South Minneapolis yard just north of Lake Street. One of the interesting things that happened with the streetcar system was it took away a lot of traffic from the sort of commuter operations that the railroads had developed in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So here we are near Minnehaha Falls. That's off to the side right here. This is the Minnehaha Falls depot of the Milwaukee Road. Certainly they had a lot of traffic that went from downtown Minneapolis to this area until the streetcar system built down here and took that traffic away because of the much cheaper fares to be able to get to the falls and get to the park and have a leisurely day. Now, Aaron's mentioned before that this is one of the few sections of track that up until the very end, had the original style of line poles that were in the middle of the tracks rather than off to the side. And then this is a representative photo of some of the unfortunate occurrences that happened when streetcars got in the way of trains that, of course, would not be able to stop in time. This specific photo was in the early 1950s, and it shows, I don't believe that steam locomotive in the photo was the one that actually hit the streetcar in question there, but this certainly shows the aftermath of that situation. One of the interesting things with this photo, though, is it's been discussed before, and it's in some of the books, that there was some sort of wire mesh screen in some way along the electrical wires overhead that would prevent a streetcar from being disabled if it were to de-wire as it went over the tracks. That wire mesh would be electrified, and so basically it would cradle the trolley wheel itself, and again, prevent the streetcar from being disabled so it could go across the tracks. In this location, that's curiously missing. And I don't necessarily have an explanation of why in this specific location it's missing. To give you greater context, this is actually near the Minnehaha Falls Depot of the Milwaukee Road. This is 42nd Avenue South on what would be the Fort Snelling line. I would say that this photo is looking to the south because that corner store on the side kind of gives evidence that we're not looking toward the falls. The falls would actually be the falls in the park would be behind the photographer. But it is certainly interesting to think that the wire mesh was not in this location, and I couldn't necessarily find the exact reference to this specific accident. I have a couple of books over to my side here, but potentially that could have contributed to this, either that or just inattentiveness.
Brian, why do you think that locomotive isn't the one that hit the streetcar?
I don't think it would be because of the impact being from the wrong angle. Now, certainly that streetcar has been moved, but I don't necessarily see any sort of damage to some of the areas of the locomotive that could have been damaged in the impact as well, such as those footboards on the bottom. Now, again, I don't necessarily know if that was it could indeed be the locomotive, but I would say the angle of what could have been the impact, maybe why it could have been a different locomotive involved. Do you all have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't look like, because the locomotive that had hit it probably came from the other direction.
And that would be my assumption as well. But
Yeah,
sometimes what happens when we make assumptions. So,
yeah. We don't
but
know.
just putting that together, that was my thought. Okay, so okay if I go on the next one. This is a representative photo of just some of the overpasses and underpasses that the streetcars encountered along the routes. This one specifically is on 36th Avenue South, which would have been the line that went out to the Ford plant, the East 25th Street line. We can certainly see some boxcars. Some of the older ribside boxcars stopped, or not ribside, outside braced boxcars stopped there on top of the overpass itself. This particular one is also photographed because of another detail, and that is the black background with the white lettering of this destination sign. That would actually be indicative of a PCC destination sign. Sometimes those were put into the standard cars if an extra sign was needed there. So just thought that was also an interesting detail in addition to just in general the rest of this photograph. We do have other photographs that, because this area underneath the overpass there is a low-lying area, water would tend to collect in those areas. And so we do have other photographs in the collection that show streetcars trying to wade through that water. And then in certain situations when it was much higher, they would stop because they wouldn't want to short out the electrical motors. But this is, as I mentioned, a representative photo of many similar locations along the entire system. I think this one's an interesting one, showing the photographer decided to have the streetcar appear between these two different boxcars, just in the way that the photo was angled. You can certainly see the flagmen. This would be in the northeast area. I believe this is on the 2nd Street Northeast line in northeastern Minneapolis, or northeast Minneapolis. This one also, it's difficult to see, but I think this one also is represented in the sense that it shows only one track that goes over this crossing as well. Now, it's very difficult to see, but you can't really see any marks made by any wheels going through the snow in this way to indicate that there are rails to the left of this flagman here. But you can certainly see what may indicate wheels that have gone through the snow here to indicate there are streetcar rails on the other side of the flagman here. And that would certainly be representative of a lot of the crossings, level crossings with railroads, where Twin City Lines, being the second railroad to go through, had to maintain any sort of crossing, which is just standard practice in railroad and interurban, in the railroad and interurban industries, as we know. So they would want to move down to one track rather than two, because that would certainly be easier to maintain. There's a couple other photos taken by the same photographer in this time. There's some of some children actually playing near the cars, which would certainly be a big no-no today, to try and get the public not close to railroad equipment.
There's also no graffiti on any of the cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only writing is by shop crews or yard crews to just indicate any special notes for the cars. Yeah, there's no graffiti here. And I also found it interesting that a Norfolk and Western car would be up in Minneapolis, just considering at the time how far that railroad was from Minneapolis. And you could say the Santa Fe as well. This is near the fairgrounds in St. Paul, so we've kind of gone over to St. Paul here. This photo was taken when the American Freedom Train went through after World War II, I believe 47 or 48, where the my memory is failing me if they were the actual Constitution or Declaration of Independence, or if they were if they are original copies of them. But either way, you can see a line here, fairly long, of people wanting to go tour this train right here. You can also see the gravel pit that Twin City Lines had on their system there, and some of the tracks that go through. But you can also see a streetcar going through, and this would have been a Como Harriet streetcar as well. Then, of course, continuing into St. Paul here, we have Union Depot. I didn't want to leave that one out, especially since I showed the 3 depots, the 2 major depots, and then the sort of interurban or short line depot in Minneapolis. So Union Depot is here. These are the main photographs that we have of Union Depot because of the line going out through the front of it, not necessarily intersecting or going under any of the lines on the other side of the depot that would show more of the tracks. But we have a Selby Lake car. Again, you can see that it has a black background with white lettering, destination sign, which would be more for PCC streetcars. Intriguingly, PCCs weren't necessarily used on the Selby Lake line because of an area. It was the bridge over the Milwaukee Short Line, which is near where Selby intersects with Idaho Road. Because the bottom of the PCC streetcars would actually bottom out on the approach to that bridge. So it's typically standard cars or gate cars that were used on that line.
This would be a great photo for a then and now shot.
Oh, it would be.
Exactly where the green line is now.
Yep, exactly where the Green Line station is. And if I can get up to the Twin Cities next summer, I certainly will want to take a good number of those then and now photos because I haven't posted those on Facebook in quite a while. Here we have a Grand Mississippi PCC streetcar in front of St. Paul Union Depot as well. Figured a second photo of this was due because this is a good color shot as well. And then carrying this through, the PCC in the previous shot reminded me of the one time the Minnesota Rail Fans Association took a trip on the Intercampus Line, which was probably the only time a PCC streetcar was used on the Intercampus Line. And so this shows when they took the PCC up to the interchange track at the, let's see, it would have been near Eustis Street, where the interchange track with, it was either Minnesota Transfer, the Sioux Line was in that area. And so they took the PCC up that interchange track where the freight cars would typically be set out for the St. Paul campus switcher to come in and take them to the rest of the St. Paul campus itself. And then we have a photo of that. That's the St. Paul campus switcher with some of the railroad cars that would be interchanged and taken to the St. Paul campus Powerhouse. There could also be box cars that would be taken to some of the barns or other storage facilities of the St. Paul's agricultural campus as well. And that's been shown in other videos and in other presentations. But certainly one of the few areas on the Twin City Line system, although this part of it was technically owned by the University of Minnesota, but one of the very few areas on the Twin City Line systems where there could be sort of direct interchange of freight cars onto the streetcar system itself. And then a photo of, I forgot to mention, the filtration plant railway. We'll get to the Minneapolis, Anoka, and Cayenne range in a minute, but the filtration plant railway with the one car that was on that system, also showing a potential area where an electrified railroad, more of a streetcar system in the Twin Cities area, would actually interchange with freight cars. And so, as we know, this car would take those freight cars up to the filtration plant along that railway. Showing another photo of a crossing, just another one that's in the St. Paul area. This is more in the northern stretches of St. Paul and the Randolph-Hazel Park line. This would be over the Sioux Line. trackage as well. Interesting thing to note here, there is what appears to be a motorette at the controls. And so that's one of the notable parts about this photograph too. It's hard to find a non-staged photo with a motorette in it. And so this one would certainly qualify as one of just throughout normal operations. Again, going to the fact that the Dan Patch line does come under the purview of the museum because it originally started out as an interurban railway, at least on paper, or how it was certainly envisioned. But again, because it took on more of a character of a steam railroad or later diesel railroad as time went on, that's why it's included in here. This specific depot is at 54th Street along Nicollet. And so this would actually now be near the intersection of Diamond Lake Road and Nicollet in South Minneapolis. Now, the Dan Patch Line's tracks used to go up to about 50th Street on Nicollet, but ultimately that was cut back when the streetcar system extended down Nicollet Avenue. So here's the Anoka line. This is up in Anoka, just showing the interchange tracks around the Anoka depot itself. You can certainly see the Great Northern Boxcar off there near the Pillsbury Mill. And then, of course, one of the Anoka Line cars that would be ready to go back to Minneapolis. All the way over in Stillwater, we have Stillwater Union Station over here with the lines along, or with the streetcars along the Stillwater Line that could take service directly to downtown St. Paul from here. So we see one of the cars waiting, the crew there taking a brief layover before their run back to St. Paul. And I would say certainly the fact that there is a pilot on the front and the numbering would indicate this is one of the high-speed cars that went from Stillwater to St. Paul. One of the other interesting facts that we've talked about before is the Deephaven branch of the lines out to Lake Minnetonka was actually a railroad line originally built by a steam railroad, I believe the Milwaukee Road, and that was leased and electrified for the Deephaven branch to be run. And so this is out near Hopkins with the newly constructed viaduct of the extension out to Lake Minnetonka. This would be about 1905, 1906. Within a year of this photo being taken, a second viaduct would be installed in order to have two-track operation rather than one along Twin City lines through this area.
Now, would we say that's a viaduct or a bridge?
I'm only saying viaduct because most of the references that I read in books say viaduct, but you know, it's certainly, if I didn't see viaduct, I may have called it a bridge. So that's my answer. Snelling shops, of course, one of the other areas where freight cars would sort of interchange with Twin City lines. As originally constructed, it was designed where shop shifters could actually take box cars into, or other freight cars with necessary materials, inside the buildings themselves of the Snelling shops using the transfer table. And so that was one of the nice aspects of the shops as they were constructed, because 31st Street shops was sort of difficult sometimes to have freight cars interchange there because it wasn't really near freight tracks. But in this way, you could actually have materials transported there much easier and directly into the buildings of Snelling shops. And then, of course, as later years went on, the PCCs, it was easier to have them delivered because you could have the freight cars be interchanged and roll right on up to the facilities of Snelling shops. And then, as they divested and sold off the PCCs, made it easy to also ship them out. This one is a newly remodeled car by Snelling shops for Shaker Heights in Ohio. And so that one there is about to be shipped. It's all ready to be taken on that Milwaukee Road flat car. And this would connect with the Milwaukee Road short line across St. Paul.
Does that say Shaker Heights on the side there?
I believe it does. I know that's their paint scheme. And then this is one of the photos from the very last day June 19th, 1954, of the Minnesota Railfans Association Charter. This is at the Brookside Loop, and it just shows how close the railroads were to this part of the system as well. There are many overhead shots of Brookside Loop that involve the photographer actually getting up on the railroad trestle here in order to take that photo. Something today that would be a huge no-no and get you at least a heavy fine if not arrested. But shows just how close the railroads were, even up until the very end. And this would be the Dan Patch lines over here, or the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern. And then one of the very interesting aspects of the saga of car 1300, when it was first taken off Twin City Line's property and transported over to Hopkins to be stored throughout the latter part, or the middle to latter part of the 1950s and early 1960s. This shows the modified link and pin coupler that connected 1300 to some of the freight cars that were in the special train created for it. Now, the brake system was incompatible between the streetcars and the freight cars here because streetcar had straight air brakes rather than the railroad type of air brake. So an air brake line had to be run through the entire car between the two freight cars on each end, and a freight car on each end provided enough braking force for this train as it carried 1300. Now, certainly wouldn't be allowed on railroads today to do it like this, but this is certainly how that was done when it was originally transferred away from Twin City Line's property. And then to end, we have another photo of 1300 in its train there, underway. This actually looks like it's doing a shoving maneuver with the brakeman here on the front, or on the point, I should say. But final photo there showing 1300 in that train, which is probably one of the more, I would say, arguably spectacular combinations of streetcars and railroading in the Twin Cities area. Thank you very much.